Okay.
And Melody, if someone wanted to have a conversation that wasn't recorded, we could stop the
Yes,
recording,
you
correct? And then
can,
turn it back
yes,
on.
you
So,
can
okay.
definitely pause if anyone wants to, kind of speak off the record. But I think a lot of the information that we share here is helpful information, or just helpful perspectives to share to the community. I mean, I don't think that this isn't a lecture, this is a discussion. We're not coming in necessarily, with a canned presentation to share like factual information. It's just more looking at AI through different lenses, different perspectives. How is it helping us? What should we be mindful of? What are the ethical concerns? What are the ways that it's actually helping the community? What are the ways it's helping us as individuals? What are the ways that it's potentially harming the community and being mindful of, not continuing to exacerbate systemic inequities and different things like that. So, I do think that this is valuable information to share beyond the folks who can make it at this time. But yeah, welcome everybody. This is a discussion. You are welcome to unmute and join in. We have a couple different topics that we can, talk about if folks didn't come with their own information. Hi, welcome, Dahlia. Good to see you.
Hello.
Yeah, so if folks have certain things they want to, kind of delve into, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I think Fielding, you said you had a couple things to start us off with.
Yeah, so I guess I have three things. One is really quick, the second is more of like a case study, and the third is looking at a document. So I'll share the first two because those feel like stories and feel fun. And the third we can decide whether we want to do together or not. So the first is just a really quick update and is kind of like the gossip in the AI world, or like what's happening. And that is so Claude has long been identified as like the ethical AI, right? So for a long time, even users who are like, I won't touch ChatGPT, I like Claude because they don't automatically train on what you put into it. Right. So the automatic setting for Claude for a long time was that they did not train on yours. You could turn it on, but the automatic setting was that they did not train on what you were putting into it. Guess what they do now? I think it's a good learning. It's good learning that these AI companies are changing constantly, and there are reasons that they want that turned on, and it's lucrative for them. And so, um, if you were Claude only and that was your reason, number one, go into your settings and turn off training so that, if that is important to you, to know that you need to do that now. But also potentially consider other options because you can turn it off in other ecosystems as well. So that's just kind of a random update that I thought was kind of interesting. The second thing I wanted to share was a case study. So, for those of you who have attended past sessions or know Melody or I in real life, one of the reasons we came together to have these conversations is because while we work with similar types of organizations, while I think we share a lot of values, our approach and thinking about AI is a little bit different. And so we thought this would be the fun back and forth because there's something here, right? There's a tension that we can bring to this topic. So one of the things that we do agree on, in theory, is that we want to make funding more accessible to small and mid-sized community-based nonprofits, right, who have been disadvantaged because of the way that our philanthropic system is designed. It is intentional, and she and I both work with clients who have been disadvantaged by the system, and we do everything we can to help them get the money. And so we're critical of, grants as a system, right? Where we maybe differ is whether we think AI can really make a difference, right? And so I'm sharing this because I think it's a way that I'm using AI to make a difference, and I'm kind of excited about it. And I'm looking for Melody's feedback and others' feedback on am I thinking about this the right way? So I was invited in by a funder to provide a training on a specific funding opportunity to a bunch of farmers. So what do we know about farmers? They don't know how to write a grant, right? Their hands are in the dirt. They are growing tomatoes. They're providing food in their local communities, and these are all disadvantaged farmers in one way or another. So this state funding opportunity comes out. It's a big chunk of change. And the funder was like, hey, I want some of our local farmers to get access to this funding. And so they asked me to do a training. So of course I'm like, yeah, great. I can come in, we can walk through the application together, we can even vet ideas, we can do some like thinking about how to build a narrative, etc. And I realized that, but in 3 hours, like we're not going to generate grants for every single one of these farmers, right? And so what can I do? Like, how do I really bring it, and how do I help them get over the scariness of a blank page? And I was like, oh, cool, I can build a custom GPT. So the night before the training, I built a custom GPT designed for people who have no idea about grants, um, and trained on the opportunity. And the way that I trained it required it to do an eligibility check before it started into the application. So it's vetting the organization's eligibility, their project idea eligibility, and giving them ideas if their project did not fit on how they could possibly make it fit. So I handed this off to all of them, and I don't have the results of that yet. So I did the training on Friday. It's due a week from this coming Friday, and they have until next Wednesday to book a call with me to kind of review their application and get it in. So more to come on whether it worked or not. But in the room, there was like this audible sigh, right? Of like, oh my God, I don't have to like come up with all of these answers by myself. One of my reflections has been, would it have been useful to provide the tool without the training? No, I don't think so. Because during the training, we vetted ideas, right? Every time I was walking through like a prompt or like how I would approach a section, I was saying, okay, what's your project? Let's talk it through for your project, right? And so they were getting tons of coaching along the way, but I'm hopeful that the tool helps bridge between, okay, my idea is a good one, Fielding gets it, to now there's words on a page. So anyway, I'm open to discussion and critique on that, but I just thought it was such a maybe a new way of thinking about how AI can bolster, existing things that we do as grant professionals.
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, this is the first time I'm hearing of this. I mean, I feel like it's exciting, you know. I think, like a lot of things, the devil is in the details. Is it going to work, right? I immediately kind of feel a little bit like, is it going to be that there a lot of them are given the same exact advice where, there isn't necessarily that creativity, and then it ends up kind of funneling folks to do these kind
Mhm.
of similar approaches that may or may not work for everyone, which in a sense, that's what oftentimes happens with government funding anyways, but is this going to kind of continue to exacerbate that? And so, I'd be curious to see the results of it and how well it does with, giving folks advice that's maybe a little more specific to their situations and not generalized,
Yep.
as kind of often happens with AI.
Yep.
Other folks have thoughts on that? I mean, I'm assuming you like tried it out with a couple different
Yeah.
things. Like,
Yeah.
was it giving advice that you found to be helpful at the end of the day?
So it was really, really good at raising red flags. So it was really good at saying, this doesn't look like it's going to be a fit for this reason.
Hmm.
Right. And that's actually a lot of the coaching I was doing in the room. Where I don't think it would be as good as me, at least in this iteration, right? I literally created this in an hour. So, like, could you build something more robust? Of course. What it wasn't doing is like asking the follow-up questions that I would typically ask. So one of the things that I was teaching people in the room was like, okay, so if you go through this and you're like, yeah, it's right, but like it's not specific or it doesn't feel like me, like you can just chat with it right back and forth. And I think that's what feels so accessible. So once they get a printout of their responses, they could say, yeah, but actually what we're really thinking we're going to do is blah, 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 right? And it doesn't have to be formatted. It doesn't have, it can just be a notes list. And so I was even saying to them, before you ask it to write anything, just brain dump anything you can think of that's related to you, your business. You can give it access to your website if you have a website, right? You could give it a one pager that you send out to your CSA, folks, like whatever it is, that you already have written up about your organization. Like give it some context, right? Because that's really what's gonna allow it to provide those more specific answers. So to your point, yes, I mean without any additional context, it's gonna be they're gonna submit the same thing everybody else is submitting. So I am curious in these one-on-ones. I start them later this week. What it will actually look like.
Yeah, because I think that's the part with when, because, when I work with a lot of folks that are, from communities that are, historically marginalized and minoritized, who, may not have had access to the same opportunities, who may not look at systems in the same way that other folks do, right? And I think actually, that's something that a lot of folks that I work with, that who I'm kind of imagining also going through this process with you, would maybe need more permission or more support in pushing back,
Hmm.
right? Because it's almost like, oh, well, you're the expert and you're telling me to do it this way. And there maybe needs to be more of like an encouragement to say, I'm not right about whether or not your programs are going to work this way, right? You're the expert.
Yep.
And oftentimes the problem with AI is it comes into the room as though it's always the expert, and then folks are more likely to believe it than even a person,
Correct.
and less likely to push back and more likely to say, oh, well, it told me to do it this way, and so it must
Mhm.
know better than I that this is the better way to do it.
Yep.
So that's the part where I would have pause with something like this. And I mean, it sounds like you've kind of addressed some of this already, but that might need to be something that's, in your one-on-ones push
Yep.
through a little bit more, is really like, hey, do you really want to be doing this? Because that's been something, I've talked about that with you before with working with some of my clients where, they say, oh, well, ChatGPT wrote a strategic plan for me. And I've had to go through bullet by bullet and say, okay, but this is what this means. Do you want to be doing that over the next
Yes.
year? Right. And it
Yes.
wasn't, something that they felt like they wanted to do ultimately. But that's where it took a lot of prodding, was to, really kind of even help folks understand that, that it's, that's just because ChatGPT said it doesn't mean that that's the right thing to be doing for you or the
Yep.
best thing for your community.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and there was a little safety in this particular opportunity because it's incredibly narrow. Like you can build a building, you can buy equipment. That's essentially it. And so there's no program development, which I think, positions it nicely for ChatGPT. It's kind of a checkbox activity. Like, is your project eligible? Did you ask for funding in the right bucket? And can you deliver on these predetermined set of outputs and outcomes? And so in some ways, it's almost so cookie cutter that certainly they should be determining whether they should rent or buy a building, right? Like there's some very foundational decisions that need to be made. Can they come up with a match, right? But in some ways, this funding opportunity is incredibly simple compared to so many others where you would be developing projects or salaried positions or things that are really going to impact people and communities in the development of the proposal, right?
Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like this would be the right opportunity to kind of try this out on and just see, but it'll be interesting to hear what folks come back with as far as, the results of
Mhm.
um people's experience with it.
Yeah.
Definitely let us know on the next call what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I will. Anyone else want to jump in with other questions, thoughts, ideas?
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted a prompt for everything. Well, first of all, just thank you for kind of convening us all together to have this discussion. A little bit about my background. I'm actually in Alberta on the Canadian side, so the parameters, guidelines for fundings might be slightly different, but overall, I feel like grant writing is generally universal across the board in a lot of ways. So I am relatively new to grant writing, and the way I've been using AI is more just like an experimental, like explorative stage, where a lot of the things you've already been discussing is like recognizing the limitations of it and how it can be more used as like a tool to augment my work. The two things that took away from like the last few months of just experimenting where I began to realize, like you said, it's not a decision maker. It doesn't have that decision making capability or that critical lens because obviously it's only working on with the information that you put into it. But on the other side, I found the value behind it has helped me keep things simple. Where maybe my application or my writing has started to maybe go on a tangent or maybe moved away from, aligning with funder priorities and everything. So for me, it has helped me really maintain a good focus on my writing, if that makes sense, in terms of actually aligning with funders' priorities.
Yeah, I think, that is one way that sometimes it can be helpful for me, and I'm generally more of a reluctant AI user. Sometimes is, if I have really well-written content already, a really well fleshed out program, it's, maybe saying, "Hey, here's what the funder's looking to fund. What of the thing I have built out already, where should I shine the light?" Right? Like help it, help find that alignment a lot quicker than maybe a person can. um that's something that it can be helpful with doing, even if it doesn't have always 100% success rate. You can, sometimes in a couple tries get it there.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I thought was interesting as well is working with farmers. I work with artists, musicians, et cetera, creatives, if you will. And it's the same instance where the average musician doesn't necessarily know how to write a grant. So I find it's a lot of also communicating as a grant writer the value that you can bring to the table over an AI. What are all the things that we just take for granted as experienced grant writers that we just have knowledge, expertise at our hands, where the AI application, it can spew out a very generic grant application, but there's none of that expertise behind it.
Yeah, I am a big proponent of AI as a tool for experts. Like, if you don't have content expertise, you have no idea if what it is putting out is good or not, right? You can ask it to do a task, but you have to be able to evaluate whether it did the task and whether it did it well. And there are some things where it doesn't really matter, right? Like I can ask it, I don't know, something personal. Ask it to plan a vacation, right? For an adult with two kids who are 2 and 6 years old, right? I mean, like you can ask it to do things that are low stakes. And even if it's wrong, it's not going to change your life dramatically. But I think when we talk about using AI in a business case, we need to be really careful that that there is a person who is evaluating the output for best practices in whatever field they're in, right? And actually, I really love this as a segue to my third discussion topic. So if others don't have pressing things, the NIH released on July 23rd a application policy related to AI. And I'm going to share the link in the comments or in the chat. Um, I can pull up on my screen, but I'm afraid it'll be so small it will be unreadable anyway. Um, but basically, it is instituting a new policy limiting the number of applications that the NIH will consider per principal investigator per calendar year. Oh, look at that, Melody. Look at you. Um, and it is providing guidance on appropriate use of AI to maintain fairness and originality. So that was at the top under the purpose section.
Oops, sorry.
Yep, right there. So then there's some background, and basically what it's saying is that like AI is being used by PIs to submit way more proposals than they have ever done individually before, right? And so NIH is basically throwing up its hands and saying there's absolutely no way that we can do peer review for all of these applications. It's impossible. And I kind of appreciate that they're saying that instead of just like designing an AI tool on the back end to like process applications faster. I appreciate what it seems to be of of a doubling down on the peer review process, and I think in the in the research world that's incredibly important, right? And so I get it, right? So we've gone from an average of 6 applications to an average of more than 40. Like that's wild. Can you imagine any funder trying to deal with an 8 times more situation, right? I mean, or not 8 times. What is it? 7 times, right? I mean, that's impossible to imagine. And so,
And that is, not to interrupt, but that is what funders are dealing with,
a
and
hundred
even
percent.
more than 7 times. A lot of funders have come out and said, whoa, we've reached 10 times as many applicants as we usually get for this round, or,
Correct.
sometimes even more than that. So this is the
This is
effect
real.
of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so then this thing goes on to say that it is actually going to use AI detection technology, which should immediately raise some warning bells because as far as I have heard, there are no AI detection technologies that work super well. Like my understanding is they work okay, and it's a percentage, right? Like they give you a percentage likelihood that some portion of a document or the whole document was generated by AI. So it's not a definitive yes no, right? And so a lot of like if you took something straight out of ChatGPT for free and you ran it through a detector, it would probably catch it. What I think is a little bit challenging in this is that is the AI detection tool. We don't know which one they're using, so we would not be able to run things through it in advance, right? So number one, we don't know the tool. Number two, what is the cutoff, right? Because human written language will trigger a response on that detection tool, and it's typically 20% or less, right? So there's this weird space between like 20% and maybe 70% where is it human, is it AI? We don't know how are they going to deal with that? And so we don't have all of those details in here. If you go down to the policy, it says we will not consider applications that are either substantially developed by AI or contain sections substantially developed by AI.
Which are very subjective terms.
Hold on, it gets even worse. To be original ideas of the applicant. So if all the ideas in the application are original, but it was written by AI because you dumped your original ideas into AI and had it write the grant for you, what is that? How are they going to deal with that, right? Because the idea could be your original idea and you could use AI to craft an argument. One of my early roles as a federal grant writer was to actually copy edit the work of English as a second language researchers because they had these cool ideas and they could not clearly articulate what it is they wanted to do in a way that a native English speaker would score highly. And so I literally would go through and just rewrite their application, right? And make their ideas clearer. And so they could use AI to do that now easily. But would it trigger on an AI detection tool? Even though all of their ideas are original. So I think I hate this policy for so many reasons. And I understand like where it's coming from, right? But it feels like a really blunt way to talk about this stuff instead of like being really precise about what it is that's the problem. So like they're going to just limit the number of applications now. that's one way to deal with some of this, right? Is to just sorry, you can't submit 40, you can now submit 6. And or whatever it is. It's in here
It's six.
somewhere.
It's six.
It is
Yeah.
6. Okay.
And it's six
Um,
new, renewal, resubmission, or revision.
yeah. Yeah.
Six total. You get six,
6
which
total.
I don't disagree. I don't think that that's, yeah, you pick your six best ideas.
Yeah.
Six
Yeah.
best ideas. You don't
Yeah.
need 40.
Yeah. So
I mean,
I
I
don't
don't know,
know.
maybe
Like
I'm
I want
wrong.
to
I
see
don't
more of
do
this.
NIH grants, but do you agree that like probably your top six ideas are
The interesting part is folks who get fun. So there are researchers out there who suck up this money. I mean, they're just like they know exactly how to write a grant, right? I mean, number one, there are training programs to write grants for NIH and NSF, like just to write those grants because they are so formulaic.
Mhm.
Um, so there are people who sort of hacked the system a long time ago who are like, they're just researchers who, number one, have really great ideas, but number two, know how to structure a grant in a way that is going to score well. And so this is where, so number one, I would say I know personally of researchers who submit way more than 6. And they
Even, but
get
you
funded
mean
in more
even
than
before
6.
AI?
Yeah, before AI. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this could hurt some PIs. And remember that most of these grants have 3 or 4 or 5 PIs on them. So a lot of these grants you'll have a content expert, you'll have a statistics expert, you'll have there's just like you bring in a whole team of people because you want to show that you have like the A1 team. And so that I mean, and that has been part of the game all along. And so I've worked with researchers who might submit as the lead PI on 4 or 5 of these, and might be written in as a co-PI on 10 more. That wouldn't be uncommon.
And so, I mean, you know me, I'm all about, grants are a way to create community impact. This is about community impact. Do you think that even prior to AI entering the chat, right? Was this the best way to do it? Was that the way to have the most community impact in the research field? Is to have a few people who really kind of crack the code being able to tap into the most funding, or perhaps this was something that needed changing and AI highlighted that this was an issue.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's like a lot of things there, right? So number one, there's a huge divide between research and community. Like the reality is most research ends with a paper that is paywalled and inaccessible to the average community member. So I would push back on the question to say, and I think NIH researchers would argue with me and they'd be mad I said it, but there's a real divide between the research that gets done under an NIH grant and it filtering into anything that is useful to community. Um, so I think so that's part of the challenge, I think, in answering your question. But I think the other side is like, yeah, it's always been a game. Grants are always a game. Like the team that's the core issue, right? Is that grants are not and have never been about the organization that is best positioned to make the biggest impact. They're designed to position the organization with the most grants knowledge and most historic funding so that they've built their infrastructure. So, this is why we have organizations that have been historically and continue to be underfunded and underrecognized because we've got all these systems in place that keep them out, right? So, yeah, I mean, the same thing happens with NIH and I think any other grant. And to the extent that AI, I think the question here is like, did AI make it easier for more people to throw their hat in the ring? Yeah. Yeah, it did, right? Because we can see just the sheer number of applications. That doesn't mean they were quality, but it also doesn't mean they weren't quality.
Yeah. And that is one of my biggest the biggest headache for me when it comes to AI specifically in the grant world. I got all kinds of headaches about AI outside of grants,
Me too.
summarizing my email, all this other stuff. But specifically in the grant world, it can pump out too much content too quickly. And where the RFPs that are written by AI, they come out too quickly, without enough of a timeline, I think, for appropriate deliberation and thought of what the process even is and what the details even are. And then they're so much significantly longer than what anybody could feasibly pump out without the use of AI. And so, I've had instances where RFPs have come out that have been significantly longer than the same RFP that has been issued by that, entity in previous years that has either been disclosed to be or very obviously has been written or partially written by AI. And then that just means that it's a lot more either, individual people doing a lot more work having to read through all that, or more commonly, it's then on the grant, the grant applicant side, they're then putting it into AI. And the idea of AI talking to AI is not in my, like, why? Like, let's just cut out that and have a different process if it's just going to be AI talking to AI. But that all being said, I'm always very reluctant that anything that comes out of Silicon Valley, as somebody who lives right here at on the edge of Silicon Valley, I'm always reluctant that anything that comes out of there is going to help you know like fix any inequities. It just seems to exacerbate them. Um, but I think with something like this, there is potential that this could help create pathways into research for folks who've been historically excluded, by, creating a process that limits how much, kind of the same people who get the bulk of the funding are able to access that. I have a couple of questions in my mind about, does this mean that you have like a puppet PI and it's really like there's some kind of deal where it's the same person who, on the back end, I don't know how that all could play out on this end. Um, but also, just kind of, it seems like highlighting a bigger issue of just what is the role of research in this country? Because, research should tie to community impact. Maybe societal impact is a better word for it, though, but like it should. If it's not, what are we even doing? What are we even doing with all this time and effort and money if it can't directly be linked to any kind of societal impact? I mean, I think it does, though, right? Research shapes the direction of future funding and future, whatever it is. And the questions, who asks the questions, does kind of control the direction that different uh kind of sectors go in the future. And I think, we've seen as research field has become more diverse and people who have different types of lived experiences are able to be the ones who get those fancy schmancy articles behind the paywalls, it does change how that, whether it's the medical field, whether it's the scientific field, whether it's community development, urban planning, whatever it is, the research does help to, steer the ship. So, if this is having folks pause and say, hey, we need to make some changes here, I just really hope they use it as an opportunity to continue to pause and say, where else can we make better changes in this? But I think for somebody who doesn't work on NIH grants, what jumped out at me here is just the kind of consistent messaging we're getting from funders of like, holy shit, everybody, like we can't keep up with all of these frickin' grants that you keep throwing at us. And, and I think this is one option, is to say we're now, tossing out AI written, proposals. The follow through on that is going to be difficult, right? But what a lot of funders are doing, especially, I usually do a lot more foundational grants and things than government grants. And what a lot of those funders are doing are saying, okay, we're switching to invitation only, which I
Yeah,
think harms us too, because then,
for sure.
who's more likely to get invited in to submit? It's the people who went to college with the people on, the board of the funder, right? And not folks who are working from within communities who oftentimes have a better understanding of community needs and potential solutions that work and more effective cultural competency and all that good stuff, those folks don't usually get invited to submit because they don't have that way to get their foot in the door in the same way. So I think, this is something that, even outside of NIH is something that we're seeing different ramifications of across the board of how folks are dealing with this. I think a few examples that I've seen just in the since we last met was multiple funders that usually do kind of just submit a proposal approach have now switched to LOIs, and a really short LOI before inviting folks to submit a proposal. And I think that's something that's super common. And then also, folks that have, gone invitation only. And with the LOI process, I've had these funders that you're able to submit a full application and be able to include all the nuance of the problem and of your solution. And now they're like, give us an LOI that describes your organization, the need statement, everything in 300 words, and your solution and your goals and objectives in 300 words. If it's a nuanced thing, that's really hard to do, right? And it's not. So, I mean, I just don't know how you can really get a full understanding of what a nonprofit is doing in 300 words enough to be able to, I mean, I feel like I saw a lot of this years ago. It was almost popular to say, like, tweet us your solution, right? Like, imagine this is Twitter. Give us like, I saw that in a few proposals a few years back. I see some nothing. I think a few of us did. And that was just like, what? And this is, again, it's just kind of like, these are complex problems that have been created often in my area. It's like, it's been created by generations of systemic inequity. I can't tweet you what the problem is and tweet you the solution. Like, I can't, and 300 words, if you divide that into all the things they're trying to have you talk about, it's almost like a tweet for each of those. I don't know what we call them anymore now that it's X, but yeah.
I saw Dahlia had a hand up and maybe some ideas.
I think Melody was kind of going there just in terms of it's not just government, that we're seeing it across the board. And I wonder if people are using AI to write their LOIs now. Probably are, and maybe AI is good at condensing to 300 words. I don't know. Maybe, but they're going to miss all the nuance. And then a human has to go back and try to tweak it again. Or
Yeah,
maybe start from scratch.
It can, and it does it fairly well. I just don't know that again, and it kind of depending on what the subject matter is, but at least with a lot of the clients I work with, it's not easy, little things. These are very complex,
Yeah.
complex issues with a lot of different nuance that matters. And that's what usually gets cut out. That's what's, kind of the fat that gets trimmed off. And that's the part that actually matters, and I think this is something I see a lot when I have my clients, when they actually are able to kind of interact with a funder and kind of really get into that nuance and have a little more control over where the conversation goes and say, hey, this is what what actually matters, right? It seems like that's what, oftentimes can be a better, a more persuasive kind of approach to it than, answering these kind of set questions in a limited word count that, misses a lot of that nuance.
Do you have a sense that funders understand that? I mean, they're invitation only. Obviously, they have to go outside of their comfort zone to do those invitations to people they don't know. I mean, are they getting that?
Well, I mean, my personal viewpoint of funders is, that I think it's, it's again, there's different levels of it, right? I think at their hearts, they're really trying to kind of do the same things we're trying to do, make the world a better place, right? And then they
Yeah,
have the practical matter of I have this much staff and this many
right.
hours in a day, and the board says we need to accomplish this, and we
Yeah,
have to try to kind of maybe figure out how to do all that. And I understand, I'm very understanding that they also have a lot of work. And I have sat on the funder side of the table, right? And so you're sometimes balancing a lot of different things, and you want to be able to say yes to everybody and you can't. And the problems that you're trying to solve are always bigger than the pot of money you have to solve them. So I mean, I fully understand all of this, and I think everybody's trying to do the best they can with the resources they have, including funders. But
yeah,
that being said, I have always felt like there is some hubris in the idea that, well, we know the right people to invite in to submit. I think there's some hubris in that. And I think that that's not true. I don't think anybody knows all the right people to submit, even when it's a small community. The San Francisco nonprofit community is not that huge, like we're big, the Bay Area is big, but like the nonprofit community, a lot of us know each other pretty darn well. And I'm constantly being, happily excited about different work that's happening in the community that I've lived in for damn near 2 decades. And I'm like, holy shit, that's going on, right? Like, and this is
yeah.
where I live and breathe. Like, you just can't know, and then it does become who you know. And anytime it's who you know, that exacerbates divides.
Right. Mm-hmm. Do you
Well, and
think, I mean, have you seen funders like come to that recognition? I think maybe a few do. The more progressive ones are noticing that, I think, from what I've seen, but maybe not across the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to make any kind of blanket statement about funders, right? Because,
Yeah.
there's all different types of funders. So I think there are those that do, and I think a lot of folks are trying. Um, Again, I have seen, a lot more harm caused in the name of equity than good. I feel like maybe not more, but I've seen it kind of play out that folks are, sometimes when they're trying, it intentionally makes things worse, and so, I think, um not to say that we don't try anymore though, but I think it is kind of it's an iterative process, and you have to kind of like have have conversations like this, and think about it from different perspectives. And a lot of resources are spent on the grant process. And I think a lot of times when funders are like, I'm trying to get as much funding as possible to the actual work, it seems like one of the best ways to do that is to reduce the amount of time that folks are spent on writing, RFPs, reading proposals, scoring proposals, all of this. And especially when you're getting 10 times as many applications. And so again, I don't know that I have the solution, but I think that we do have a problem right now. And I don't know that there is a great solution.
Vule wrote a blog post on his blog, Nonprofit AF, about his I think it's through conversations with foundations, et cetera, but has found that the foundation staff, when a foundation has, a separation between staff and trustees, the foundation staff are like, yeah, we're in. We got to change things. We got to do things differently. And the trustees are like, no, 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 you don't. Right. And so the foundation staff are often aligned with a lot of the voices of the nonprofit space. They're like, this system doesn't work. It's not equitable. You're not finding the organizations you need to be finding. And trustees are like, nope, this is how we do it. This is how we've always done it. We're not changing. And so, right, there's even a balance there as we reach out directly to funders where the staff that we may be interfacing with may agree with us and be unable to either say that directly or be fighting that fight internally and not making up much room. So I think some of those same dynamics, right, are playing out even within individual foundations, where we do have advocates, but they're not able to change things because of who ultimately holds the strings to the purse, the
Yeah.
trustees.
Oh, well, I think, in addition to kind of some of the more logistical side of AI and the grant world, I think just from like a human perspective, I always find it interesting with the AI, how we humans have the capacity of, think of like Castaway with like the volleyball, right? Like we will humanize anything, right? Vaguely put a face on it and we will humanize it, right? And I have found it I do find a lot of ways that we try to, that we just do as humans, humanize things that aren't human, right? Um, and how that interplays into AI. And one way I think is trusting it, like, you trust it like it gave you an opinion, that, a knowledgeable opinion in a way that you would maybe trust a person in your life to give you advice, right? And there was a recent post on GPA um about
Melody, I don't think you can share the screen because I
I
don't
won't I
think,
won't
okay,
share it,
okay.
but I'm going to share one part of this that I
Yeah.
found interesting. And that, it's actually says in here, you can start to think of chat as real, right? And then it goes on to say that once it told me a cow joke unasked for, just to be cute. That was hilarious, and somehow I think it knew I was tired during one of the long chat analysis. But of course, it didn't know my state of mind, but it logically understood we had been at it for several hours, so it gave me a hug in the form of a joke. And I think that's such an interesting, like, it doesn't know shit, right? Like it doesn't know anything. And the quotes were their quotes, right? So they know it doesn't know anything, right? But I do find that interesting that like even the verbiage, even that you want to say, well, it knew I was tired and knew I needed a pick me up. When what is that really? Is that an algorithm? Is that an algorithm that was built into that to like make it tell you a joke at a certain point? Or like where does this even come from? Why is that even a feature that's built into this? It's
But
just
I think to your point, at some point, the way that I suspect a lot of this gets monetized, especially the free version, is they're in the world of attention, right? Just like Netflix, right? So Netflix boosts their outputs that they talk about. So if you watch something like 12 seconds of a show, it considers that you watched that show. And so, Netflix is constantly feeding you new things, right? And it's all about engaging you and keeping your attention. And I wonder if that is being sort of like baked into these models from very early times to get us hooked and like keep us coming back, keep the dopamine hits coming. And so did it know that she was literally tired? No, but she might have been like, that's not it. And like maybe the way that she was typing changed, right? The
responses coming
tone.
slower, tone change, yeah,
Yeah.
different things. And that's
Yeah.
creepy to me. That's creepy to me that this is built in to be like, I can sense I'm losing this person. Let me hook them with a little
And to
bit
be fair, this is conjecture, right? Neither of
conjecture.
us
Yes,
know this is true.
conjecture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is really easy to then personalize this, you know, AI machine. And this is something that actually has come up in my personal life. I was at a event at my in-laws, and there was an elderly person who is retired and lost his wife, and he's spending a lot of time alone, and he pulls out his phone with Claude on it, and he said, I don't even need to go out anymore because I just can talk to Claude. And I don't know that I think a lot of people are worried about like how AI is affecting our young people. And I think, from my experience of, Gen Alpha and Gen Zers, like, I don't know that they have a whole lot of interest in AI, right? Like, I think they're like, yeah, yeah, we tried it. Okay. But I mean, I think it's boomers that I'm concerned about who don't have the bullshit meter with technology that our young people have, that they learn very quickly. And are even more vulnerable to forming attachments to AI in ways that, are not healthy and are further, creating echo chambers and further isolating people who ultimately we would want to historically be bringing into our community even deeper at that time of life, and millennia of human evolution has been that the older somebody gets, the more they become ingrained in society. And AI is pushing them out more and away from what I can tell. Not grants related, but something that's been on my mind. And also, something that I think if you're using it pretty commonly, is more likely to start forming attachments, or, considering it to be something that has more knowledge and more understanding than it has.
I had a question to see if people were seeing the same things. So even having the national border may be a good indicator of this. So it seems like a lot of the discussion is revolving around almost making it like a numbers game where you just spew out an X amount of applications, and then realistically there's the other side where you're supposed to know people in the organization, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm noticing on the Canadian side, and this is across the board, whether it's private banks, public funders, public foundations, is a lot of them are currently in the last year or two really revamping all of their guidelines and all of their funding priorities in terms of quote unquote trying to make it easier for nonprofits to actually apply for their grants or their programs. Um, and what goes hand in hand with this is a lot of them are actually converting over to online portals where everything has to go through this portal in terms of applications. So my question is, well, I guess two, do you see this on the American side? And then B, do you think this is almost like a reaction or a symptom to what we were discussing previously in terms of the number of applications just going up astronomically and they can't deal with the volume? Is this their way of coping with that? And realistically, is it under the guise of like trying to make it easier for the applicants when it's actually more about trying to make it easier as funders to get through all the applications?
Can I ask you a clarification question? So when you say
Sure.
they've moved to online applications, what was it before?
It was either submitted by email or it was you had to mail it in, so like snail mail. There's
Got it.
obviously exceptions to those things, but that's the general trend that I've seen where people, instead of sending it to a specific email address, it all goes through an online portal application process.
I would say, and I would be curious what other people would say, I think that happened here almost a decade ago.
Yeah, and I think it
Mm.
really happened because of the pandemic, especially the no longer mailing things in because people weren't in the office to, open them. So the difference between 2019 and 2020 and 21, as far as, just specifically the paper one, I mean, they became non-existent, right? And then whereas the email versus online portal, I think, there were some folks that were getting, saying email it to us type of thing. But man, in the last year, I rarely see the email thing anymore. And even when it is, it's usually much more of a standard form. It's less of just send us a proposal. Man, I miss those days where it was just send us a proposal and I could say what I wanted to say about the client. But I think part of it is that, a lot of funders, I think, because funders have their own, professional development and their own, kind of learning circles that they have and things like that. And I think, part of it has been a discussion that funders have had has been it's hard to compare apples to oranges. And then there's a feeling that if you standardize it, you're comparing apples to apples. And but then the problem being is what if somebody has a beautiful orange, right? And it's like to me, it's like I don't know if it's a what's the whole, if you judge a fish by its ability to ride a bicycle. They say Einstein said that, but I think it's, I don't know if he did or not. I've seen that attributed to Marilyn Monroe too, so don't trust what you read on the internet. But anyways, point being that like, everybody has their own genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to ride a bicycle, it's not, you're not going to see the genius in it. And that's kind of what I see too, is that, the more that you're standardizing it, the more you're kind of making everybody everybody ride a bicycle and judge whether or not they're good at riding a bicycle, right? And so I think, I feel like we've seen that kind of trajectory, and then maybe now we're getting to the point of I've been seeing more of like, well, you can send us a proposal or schedule a 15-minute talk with us or send us a video. And I think folks are maybe trying to create a little bit more of a you know, ability for folks to, and I've seen too where sometimes folks say like if you have like a reason, like if English isn't your first language, or if you have a disability or something and would prefer to do a call or a video, we will accommodate, kind of thing. And I've just seen it as like an option for anyone to do. So I don't know that we're ever going to go back to kind of standard proposals that folks mail in or email in. But yeah, these online portals. And then part of it, I think, is some of these companies just have really good sales teams, and they call up the funders and they give them a really good pitch of why they would, pay us this money, and we will make your lives easier, make there more impact, make it easy for you to measure impact. I think that's a big thing. It's the measuring impact. It's also like some of these emailing them in ones or mailing them in. I mean, things get lost in the mail. If somebody, you can, if the emails are going to somebody and then their staff turnover, now you got to switch all that. When it's in a portal, it's all there. You can access it years later. You have that ability to kind of look through and see the history with each organization, all that stuff that you can't do in the other way. And I think those are the points that the sales teams use to convert people into, active clients that, make money for them. And once they pick a portal, they're usually continue to use that portal, and there's this continuous money stream because it's a big pain in the butt to switch to a different portal, So I mean, like that's the cynic in me, is that this is just a lot of good old-fashioned capitalism at play.
One of the things I've noticed recently is that I'm seeing more funders go to a non-password controlled form. So they're like essentially setting up a Google form, right? And they're asking for applications that way. And I love it because as a consultant, the last thing I want to do is be negotiating usernames and passwords with a client. Like, what a waste of time. And then on the flip side, you've got some that have now gone to two-factor authentication. You're like, well, I'm never getting in again, right? And so like I think we see all of it. And we're constantly seeing funders test out new options. And I don't think there's a perfect one, right? I mean, I think there are benefits to being able to save something and come back to it, and there's benefits of being able to see something and not having it password protected and like being able to get in immediately. So I feel like it's kind of all over the place, but in general, I would say we saw the vast majority of US foundations move away from mailed in. And I think I actually hand wrote one application in 2012, my first year ever of grant writing. I had to hand write it. Like that was the rule.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, I have the worst handwriting. Like I am slow and it's hard. And I grew up on computers. Like by high school, I typed all of my, work on a computer. And so the idea of handwriting an application was just like, are you kidding me? We haven't seen a lot of that in a long time. I'm actually really interested in and wondering now about other countries in the world where I've sort of made the assumption that a lot of that our timelines looked very similar, but it sounds like there's a little bit of a lag. So I'm
I
interested
have
in
to
that.
say, like the average tenure of a development staff, I think in the US, not sure if this is true of Canada, went from 18 months to 16 months over the last couple of years. So like the more we can have a system align with the reality that it's not the same person doing this role, and it usually is a collaborative process. And we can have a system. I like being able to log in to an online portal and see everything and access that grant agreement, because I don't know where that old ED shoved that. I don't know what file folder they put it in, right? So personally, I see the benefit of these online systems from that point of view, that like with a revolving door, once you get the username and password, you get access to all that information. We are at time though. Thank you everyone for coming, and hope to see you all at the next one. Thank you. Bye.